Hey. Okay, good morning. It's 8 o'clock and I hereby call this audit committee meeting to order. I'll hand it over to Perla for some important announcements.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. This meeting is being conducted virtually as well as in person. So I would do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Kelly would not be joining us today. So I continue with the roll call. Mr. Bernstein.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Mr. Patrick Jones.
Present. Good morning.
Okay. Mr. Knox.
Good morning, I'm here.
Okay. Mr. Moore.
I'm here.
Mr. Santos.
Good morning, I'm here.
And Chair Sanchez.
Here.
On the Board of Retirements, I have Mr. Pryor. Mr. Kehoe. Ms. Gray. Mr. Harris. Mr. Robbins. Mr. Antonio Sanchez. Ms. Zapanta. From the Board of Investment, Mr. Green. Mr. Kehoe. Ms. Greenwood. Ms. Onyx Jones. Staff participating in the meeting include CEO Santos Priman, Deputy CEO Luis Lugo, AEOs Laura Guglielmo and JJ Popovich, Chief Counsel Steve Rice, and all other division managers. Internal audit staff, including Richard Bendel, Christina Logan, Christina Sun, Catherine Tun, Nathan Amick, George Lundy, Gabriel Tafoya, and Kimberly Hines. Consultants include Mark McKeever, Larry Godin from KPMG, Terry Olenek, Kyle Colley, Jean Young, and Amanda Cronk from Plant Moran. Audit Committee Consultant, Robert Griffin. Trustees, if you would like to be placed in the queue, please use the Zoom raise your hand feature to be placed in queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until we are ready to speak, and now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you, Perla. So we'll move on to item number 2, the approval of the minutes. Do I have any comments or a motion?
This is Keith, I'll move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. And was that a second from Mr. Bernstein?
It was Chair Sanchez indeed.
Thank you. All right.
I will now go ahead and do a roll call. Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
and Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes,
Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
The
Okay.
motion passes.
Okay. So we'll move on to item 3. Do we have any requests for public comment?
Not at this time.
Superb. We'll move on to item number 4, our consent items. Do we have a motion?
Move approval of consent items.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Jones.
Okay. Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
yes,
Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
The motion passes.
All right, moving on to item 5. We're just moving right along here. Now we're in the non-consent items. So we'll begin with the recommendation as submitted by Richard Bendel and Chief Audit Executive and Catherine Tun, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee approve the engagement of KPMG LLC to perform a consulting review of LACERA's investment office's operational due diligence program and processes. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Bendel.
Yes, right over here on the sideline. Good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. At your May meeting, you authorized internal audit to put out an RFP for a consulting engagement of the investment office's operational due diligence process. We received 2 proposals and are bringing KPMG to your committee this morning for approval. We have Larry Godin and Mark McKeever joining us from KPMG to address any questions you may have. I'll run through a brief slide presentation we have on the selection process and high-level approach that KPMG is planning to take. You also have the KPMG proposal in your package. Please feel free to stop me at any time and ask me questions or KPMG questions. Important is the definition of ODD on this first line. Pre-investment ODD is the process of evaluating whether the investment manager has the necessary operational capabilities, controls, and framework to execute on an investment mandate that LACERA is considering. And post-investment ODD is the process of continuing to evaluate these managers for that operational capability and control and framework for continuing to stay with those investments. Next slide, Tina. I won't read through the whole scope of work, but essentially, again, the scope of work covers looking at the ODD program, pre-investment and post-investment, evaluating reliance on third parties, looking at the program internally as well. And KPMG will apply, we'll have another slide that talks about their process. But at the end of the day, they're going to also bring their best practices to the process. It's a consulting engagement, so they will be, working to identify those areas to provide best practices for improving the program that we have. Next slide, Tina. This slide really points out the selection process or the scoring. There were 4 of us from internal audit, myself, Leisha Collins, Christina Logan, and Catherine Tun on the evaluation team. And we had 2 from the legal office, Steve Rice and Christine Roseland. Steve participated in the interviews only, and Christine was one of the scorers on the review. We evaluated the firms on firm background, and that included looking at their approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as other factors, team experience, methodology, adherence to RFP instructions, and lastly, fees. Next slide. As you can see, the 2 firms that we received proposals from, both scored highly, but you'll see that KPMG was higher in all categories. That's all I'm going to say on that slide. This was the initial proposal of fees that we received based on a 12-week assignment, $520,000 from Deloitte and $470,000 from KPMG. You'll see that this was modified as we move further in the slides. Next slide. Ultimately, the KPMG team stood out to all, I think unanimously to all evaluators based on their experience, approach, and methodology. Their team was significantly also more heavily weighted to senior level professionals, and that was a big selling point. KPMG will bring in an independent perspective, and we think that they're the right team to come in and do this review. This is the client team. As you can see, they all have a tremendous amount of experience. Mark, Larry, Bridget Donato, and Catherine Kim are all on the interview process. And I think all, again, unanimously, we're very impressed with all of their experience. I understand that Hannah Dietz, who's a more junior staff person, is no longer with the firm, but primarily it'll be those top 4 that will be performing the review. The project methodology is phase 1. KPMG will get an understanding of LACERA's ODD framework and perform a current state assessment. Phase 2, they'll identify those gaps, and then the final process will be developing the report to provide to us. After we selected KPMG, we met with them to further refine the scope. And based on that discussion, we mutually determined that the scope of the review didn't reduce, but we didn't need them to do as much testing at the investment manager level. And after refining that scope, they're still going to perform the full scope, but perform less testing at the investment manager level. We'll be able to bring the fee down to $304,000 and reduce the hours to $938. And we think this is a comprehensive review. I guess at this time, if there aren't any questions for KPMG, should I wait for questions? Anybody have any questions? Hearing none, I will ask KPMG to excuse themselves for the deliberations, and thank you, gentlemen, for being available.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Knox, is your question for KPMG
Oh,
or within our
There
deliberations?
was a question. Oh.
No, I can ask within the deliberations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So this time we would ask that you approve the selection of KPMG to perform this operational due diligence review.
Thank you, Mr. Bendel, for that. Mr. Knox, you have a question.
Are we all set to move forward?
I believe so.
Okay. I'm supportive and I would make the motion to approve staff recommendation. I just had a question out of curiosity, noting that Mr. Rice was included in the interviews and not that I think that's a bad idea. I was just curious if that's the norm for things like this. Was this unique? Was just to get an outside perspective? Just curious on his inclusion.
I think that answers it, is to have the additional perspective on the panel. Ms. Rosalind was not able to make that part of her process, and that's why we substituted Mr. Rice for the process, or the interview process.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move approval of recommendations.
Thank you for that.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. And you're the next question.
And the extent of my comment is just, I thought the report was very thorough. And Richard, I thought your report was strong and truncated, and I really appreciated all of that. So I'm happy to support this.
Thank you.
5 stars. Mr. Moore?
Okay, I also support the recommendation, but I had a question about whether we were looking at the outcome of the assessment in light of maybe doing more direct investing versus, having fund to funds and other types of arrangements for investing. Was that part of the consideration in the outcome of the audit?
Should we have Mr. Grable also comment on that as well?
Sure.
Mr. Bendel, do you want to go ahead and start and then?
That was not part of my consideration, but I'll let Mr. Grable speak to
Okay.
his thoughts on that.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Moore. I don't believe so is the short answer to it. I think that there are variety. I think that the definition of ODD is specific as defined in the scope of services to external managers.
Okay.
Correct. Okay. Mr. Santos?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Bendel. Could you elaborate a little bit more regarding the ENI of this particular manager? I didn't, unless I missed it, and if I did, I apologize. But typically, and I guess I'm spoiled, we get a sheet that analyzes the firm's policy, the racial makeup, gender makeup, etc. I didn't see that here. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
It was part of their proposal package. I don't know exactly what page. Catherine, can you speak to that at all, or?
Yes, Mr. Santos. They did provide that DNI blurb with their proposal. I believe it's a separate pamphlet that we can make available. Is that something that we could provide to the trustees? But it's not part of the packet.
It's not in this proposal.
Yeah, it's not.
And that's okay. If you could just elaborate for me your analysis of their policy and makeup vis-a-vis our Tide initiative. Like, where do they land? Are they right on it? Or we're missing? Are we making a commitment to talk to them in the future about improving the DNI policies and practices of the organization? Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
I don't know if I could, in terms of comparing it to our Tide. Catherine, do you think?
May I actually make a comment here, Mr. Santos? So I know we have gotten on the BOI have gotten very used to seeing that standard analysis as part of manager approvals. I think because I know that it has not been traditionally included in our recommendations here at the audit committee, but I think it's certainly open for a request to start to include that. And maybe when in between the meeting or after this meeting, you can conduct a similar analysis using that format, which is fairly basic. It's a one pager. And then that can just become a construct. Would that be an appropriate way to respond, Mr. Santos, as opposed to right now while everybody's sort of scrambling with the materials?
Well, two points on that. If I remember correctly, the previous meeting of this committee, I mentioned that and I made a suggestion because we all are one organization and those policies should be implemented uniformly. So this is not the first time that I raised this issue. And certainly your suggestion that we're going to get that information later on doesn't help me in how I'm going to vote on this item. So that's the dilemma that I have. But I understand if the staff is not prepared to elaborate on that, which is really too bad, because this is very important. But certainly in the future, I will strongly recommend, and if I need to, I will make a motion to that effect, that any analysis or evaluation or due diligence on any particular manager that the staff is recommending, that we need to make sure that that manager fulfilled all the requirements of the different policies that we have in the organization, in particular with the tide initiative, which is really important to me. So I'll leave it there, but be aware that that's something that I'm going to be looking at very closely. Again, it's one organization, all policies should be uniformly implemented in all corners of the organization.
It's certainly something we considered in the evaluation and did review that of both firms. I don't think the last part is just in overlaying that with our type program. So Mr. Lugo and Mr. Grable both have comments.
Wait, I'm not finished.
Oh.
So if that is the case, then you should be able to elaborate a little bit with regard, if you're telling me that that was part of your deliberation or the committee's deliberation, then you should be able to articulate what was it that you liked, what you don't like, and things like that.
I hear you.
While I'm waiting.
Mr. Santos, if I can just comment, between Deloitte and KPMG, if you look at the team, there was more of a diversity between the Deloitte team and the KPMG team. They did have minorities and women as part of the team versus Deloitte. The Deloitte had more of a male-dominated profile of the team. That was one aspect of it. In terms of how it relates to Tide, I think that's an area that we can work with the investments office to bring forward to you.
So based on your review, you feel comfortable that they are sufficiently diverse. And I hear when you say gender diversity, I noticed that. But I didn't see any African Americans in there. I didn't see any Latinos in there. And if that is the case, and I'm not talking about a clerk, a Latino clerk somewhere in the parking lot, but I'm talking about high-level individuals.
They do, Mr. Santos, within the firm, but like in speaking of the team, because I know that like you can hire a firm, but like if they don't have the diversity within the team, it's hard to make that decision. But like KPMG is a top 4 accounting firm, and they have a lot of diversity initiatives. I know they support MWBE like policies within the organization, and I know that they have a lot of partners that they promote within the organization, and even at the manager level that are diverse on a minority women level.
And also it's included in page 48 of the materials, which is page 11 of their materials, but page 48 of the PDF that you see, that's their total firm approach to diversity, and equity there, and inclusion. And it is fairly broad and comprehensive. I am familiar with actually both Deloitte and KPMG, and they both have very strong mature programs in DEI. So, but this is the specific commentary that they included with regard to the fullness and maturity of their own program that was included in the materials. So that is also available right now.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, you're not part of the due diligence and the staff, so I'm more interested in the staff comments, but I appreciate that information. I am also familiar with the CPA firms, which is one of the reasons why I'm raising this issue, because I don't think that they are as diverse as other firms, but nevertheless, I really appreciate the comments and thank you.
And Mr. Santos, I do appreciate that this is the second time that you have brought this up. And I think that, and if I could make a suggestion, I think that it's something that we should take up at the JOGC with regard to how to unify the approach across LACERA broadly. And I think the message here at Audit is that this should become a part of the audit analysis in the same way that it is a part of the manager analysis. And I think that that would be prudent. And so, you know, with that formal request, Mr. Bendel, if you can take that back and sort of revisit your procedures to make sure that that's included, I think that that will solve the problem here. But you're speaking of a wider kind of LACERA application that I think needs to be either handled at JOGC or OOC. I'm not sure where that would the appropriate place for that would be, but I'll leave it in your hands to think about that. Mr. Lugo, Mr. Grable.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple thoughts are, one, I think that the TIDE initiative and as part of the audit committee, and here there are many members of the Board of Investments, TIDE is much more comprehensive than a snapshot of 4 photos on a page. It's about policies, practices, and how an organization tries to get the best outcomes by having the best teams. And you need the right governance around that. So I think that TIDE is a lot more than 4 photographs on a page. So I think that we should all, and I know in the investment division, we aim higher than that. As it relates to this specific audit, I do believe, and I'd stand up at the mic and say that, as opposed to sitting down, that TIDE is in fact industry leading. And I think that we will teach and train KPMG as part of this, because I view a lot of the work that we do in TIDE as understanding the operations in the organization. And I believe we will be teaching them in the process.
Thank you for that, Mr. Grable.
If I may, Madam Chair,
I've got my hand up. Is there a better way to get in the queue?
So we're still stuck on Mr. Santos's, but we will definitely get over to you. Mr. Lugo has a comment to Mr. Santos, comment to Mr. Santos's question. So we're just trying to wrap this up. Unless you have a comment here, then we can dive in.
I just want to say that I totally agree with Mr. Grable, and I think that's a great model. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. And again, just to follow up Mr. Grable's comments, and also Mr. Santos, we are working on, as a result of the last audit committee meeting, there was a discussion held in terms of how we go about our RFP process, and then more importantly, how we have more prominence when we do come to the board or audit committee as it relates to presenting that. I think in this case, the KPMG timing on the RFP was a little misaligned, but we are taking a more holistic view in terms of our, not only our communication to the board in terms of making that prominence on the DEI front, but also to Mr. Grable's point, organizationally, policies and procedures to further kind of move that DEI initiative.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I completely agree with Mr. Grable that it is a deeper question that gets to firm operation. But we'll move on. Mr. Bernstein.
I'm on the topic, actually, Chair Sanchez. Okay. First of all, as a cordial aside, and with respect to whoever's doing the camera work, I feel like I'm watching the Blair Witch Project. I know that staff is working on getting a better mechanism for us to see people in the boardroom, but handheld moving cameras are probably not the ultimate resolution. So please keep plugging away on that. In terms of the Tide Initiative, a few things. One is, thank you, Chair Sanchez, for referring it to JOGC. I don't think it goes to OOC. I think it goes to JOGC. I literally don't recall whether BOR passed Tide. And as a process matter, if Audit is going to follow Tide, which I think would be excellent, I think we should confirm that BOR passed Tide, because otherwise Tide relates to BOI specific audits, but not only, not yet to audit stuff. I think we can clean that up if it hasn't already been taken care of. I simply don't remember, even though I was on both boards the year that we passed Tide on the BOI. I also want to say that I think Tide is more than gender and race. I think it is ability status, veteran status, LGBT participation. So I want to make sure that we're fully exploiting the requirements of Tide, but it also leads to me to a philosophical question, which again, I support Chair Sanchez's recommendation that this go to JOGC, and I think it should be explored there. And that is the expectation of Tide that organizations will cover every metric that we're looking at, or substantial elements of the metrics? Because I just think we've not clarified whether you have to check off every diversity box on your staff, or show that diversity is a substantial composition of your staff. And I think there are two different interpretations. And I think when this goes to JOGC, we ought to ask them for some clarification on that.
Okay, thank you for that. So I agree with you that these are questions that should be considered as a matter of process. We do need to clean that up. I think that's an important point. And certainly Mr. Lugo has expressed that internally they are responding to this as well. So let's take this to the JOGC. I do believe for right now, and for the record, this recommendation originally came at the same meeting that we were given that. So I think that part of this is also that it had already been, the recommendation had already been effectively created and then subsequently cleaned up in response to comments in that meeting. So let's go ahead. Are there any further comments here? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move to a vote. Okay, thank you for that. And thank you for that spirited discussion. And I think at the end, we will have, we'll move forward in our process, and that is progress. So we'll go ahead and do I have I already have a motion in a second. So let's go ahead and take the vote.
Okay, Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. So we can let KPMG back into the room. Is that right? Or
I don't think that's necessary.
They don't need it?
On to the next item, we'll notify them.
we'll just move on. So item B is a recommendation as submitted by Christina Logan, Principal Internal Auditor, and Gabriel Tafoya, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee review and approve a one-year extension for Plant Moran to perform a SOC 1 Type 2 audit for the fiscal year ending June 2023. So I will hand that over to Ms. Logan.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and Audit Committee members. Internal Audit is recommending that the committee review and approve this one-year extension for Plant Moran to perform the SOC 1 Type 2 audit for fiscal year ending 2023. We are requesting this extension with Plant Moran for only this year's SOC work. Although at the last meeting, we did express that we would be coming to you for this meeting to request approval of issuing an RFP for the work. We realized in August after the meeting that it made more sense to request an extension due to the timing of the SOC work, our own resource constraints, and then the nature of the last opinion that Plant Moran is going to be discussing in executive session. Overall, internal stakeholders have been satisfied with the level of service that Plant Moran SOC team has provided us. Their recommendations have helped to improve our processes. And lastly, the extension would still be within Plant Moran's initial contractual term of 5 years plus 2 additional years. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions? Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Jones. Okay, we'll take the roll call.
Okay. Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Chair Sanchez.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, moving on to item C. So we have a recommendation as submitted by George Lund, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee review and discuss the Los Angeles County's compliance with recommendations for rehired retirees fiscal year ended June 30, 2021. And we will consider our usual course of actions. Mr. Lund.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez and Audit Committee trustees. I'm here to talk about the Los Angeles County's compliance with requirements for rehired retirees and our examination of that for the period ended June 30th, 2021. This is an audit that we do on an annual basis. It's the responsible division is the executive office. And for this examination, we have an unsatisfactory audit rating. It's internal audit's responsibility to provide an independent assessment to management and the audit committee on governance, risk management, and control processes at LACERA. And here we are. A background of the audit, a background of the situation is that the state of California Employees Retirement Law, LACERA, and the Public Employees Pension Reform Act, PEPRA, provide that the county, if it believes retirees possess a needed special skill or knowledge, that the county has the option to employ these retirees as rehired retirees within limits such as only working 960 hours a fiscal year, observing a break in service, and for a limited time. The governor declared that rehired retirees would be exempt from these work limits if their work was related to COVID. The objectives of our audit, we set that the hours would not exceed the 960 unless the hours were coded as retirees' time for COVID. We recognize we were looking for the 90-day break in service for the IRS unless the retiree's time was coded as COVID. And the adherence to the 180-day break in service for PEPRA unless the retiree's assignment was coded as COVID-19. And PEPRA's limited duration was observed. Again, the scope of the audit was for the year ended June 30th, 2021. This year we had two findings of.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question on the prior slide before we move on?
yes, go ahead, Mr. Knox.
Mr. Lund, I know PEPRA applies to people hired after a certain date, for certain circumstances. When it comes to rehired retirees, in this case, your last bullet, the limited duration applies to everybody that is retired from now on, correct, under PEPRA?
Yes.
Yes,
That is correct, yes.
yes.
Okay. I saw some nodding heads, but wasn't sure if there was an answer there. Thank you. That was it.
I was just providing a voice to all the nods.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. First finding this year, we noted that there was a spike in the number of rehired retirees exceeding the 960-hour limit. There were 10 this year and only 1 in the prior year. two of these rehired retirees. One of them exceeded 703 hours, exceeded the 960 by 703 hours, and another one exceeded by 917 hours. We gave this a finding a high risk rating because there are no processes in place to address this issue here at LACERA. Management has agreed to develop and implement a policy and set of procedures to include a normal process as well as consequences and remediation needed to ensure compliance with CERO, PEPRA, and the IRS.
Mr. Lund, may I interrupt you there? So is the problem that there was no tracking of compliance, or that there was no alert system to, because this is a simple compliance matter that in theory you could check every week or every month. Is that was it a lack of alert notification or a lack of tracking? Those are two different questions.
Well, the process wasn't in place. There was no alert
So there was-
tracking
there was
by
no tracking.
LACERA of the hours.
Thank you.
Actually, both, yeah.
Both, got it.
So. Our second issue, we noted that there was a lack of adherence to PEPRA's limited duration language. 15% of the year's working rehired retirees for the year had worked consecutively for 9 or more years, averaging 729 hours per year over the last 4 years, each one of them. We gave this a high risk rating. Again, because there is no process in place to address or justify the extended duration of this employment. Management has agreed to confer with the stakeholders to evaluate circumstances that require the use of returning rehirees and the range duration of such use. LACERA will develop and implement a policy and a set of normal process procedures, as well as consequences and remediation to ensure compliance with PEPRA, CERO, and the IRS. With that was my summary of our audit work. Available for questions. And
Thank you, Mr. Lund. We have a question for Mr. Jones.
Good morning. Quick question for you. In our 400 plus or so staff, how many of these rehired retirees are there within our workforce?
In total.
within LACERA's workforce,
Yes.
last count there was 4, I believe.
I believe there may be 5 this year. Last year, this was an audit we brought to the committee. The LACERA portion of this we brought to the committee at the August, and for the year 2021, there were 4. I believe there may be 5 right now.
Okay, so a very small component, relatively speaking. Okay.
Maybe it may still be 4. I'm hearing from the executive team that it may be 4 still.
But
So-
it's a small component. However, would that make it a large component, meaning that did everyone who was a retired retiree break these compliance rules? Or was it just one, or was it a handful of findings? Yes.
So just to clarify, this is really focused on LA County's rehired retiree population.
Got it.
Got
it. Thank you.
The discussion was in August on LACERA's rehired retirees.
Thank you. I was really concerned there for a minute.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Moore, I think you were next.
Yeah, I wanted to know if the distribution of the staff that is participating in the rehire program, is it broad and across all county departments, or is it maybe concentrated in maybe 2 departments or a couple of different classifications? What is that distribution?
It is across many county departments. However, there is a concentration of it within the sheriff's department and the home health and the
Department of
child services area.
Child and Family Services. I
Yeah,
think.
child and family services area, but there's a concentration in those 2 departments.
So there could be some legitimate reasons why they're consistently bringing people back, and that could be staffing requirements or the lack of long-term staff planning or something like that? I mean, it doesn't have to be nefarious. It could just be a response to staffing shortages.
It certainly is part of the process, but the importance is that, you know, from our perspective and from LACERA's perspective is compliance with PEPRA. So,
Mhm.
you know, that is something that we need to have that communication with the county.
And I think I read someplace in the package that there's no notification system to let people know that they're coming up on their 960 hours and that they need to take action. That's built into the regular administration of this program. And consequently, there's nothing that monitors how many years people are participating in the program. And then I didn't hear that there was any restriction on the number of years a person could be in this program. So it's basically, there's nothing to prohibit any of this. There's no penalties for anything.
Right, and that's part of the recommendation is to develop that well, on the hours, on the annual hours going over the 960. The pension fund will develop a means to notify the individual members as well as the departments, and then claw back from the retirement, possibly claw back from the retirements, and notify them that we'll be clawing back from the department, from the individuals if they exceed the 960 hours in a year. And then the longevity issue will be addressing as well with a policy and discussion with the county CEO's office.
Okay, so the county CEO's office then is on board with the recommendations that you're contemplating. And
we're bringing this to your committee first, and then we'll be taking it to the county CEO's office. So we haven't presented it yet to them.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to see that done then.
Thank you. Mr. Knox, you are next.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I really honed in on the same thing, and I have a slightly different take. So, you know, I was looking at page 99, and it's frankly shocking, and I don't want to be overly dramatic, but it's pretty disturbing to see this number of individuals working consecutive years as rehired retirees. And yeah, I appreciate there may be very good reasons to keep some people, but at some point this stops being retirement, and this is just another version of employment. And being a department head, that, you know, our last retiree was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and we did it for 2 months, and it felt like it took an act of everybody to get just that 2 months. And I was warned up and down about cannot exceed 960, limited duration, and I just find it really problematic that departments are going beyond those boundaries, and it feels like we don't do anything other than send a gentle reminder to DHR once a year. So I'd be curious to hear from Mr. Lugo, not this second, or Mr. Kryman, but after the fact, you know, what this engagement is and how strong it is. It's funny, the things that we engage with on the county where both sides draw this hard line. But then on this one that seems very important, and there's IRS and PEPRA and SERL considerations, we just kind of dance around it. Okay, we'll see you next year, and we'll kind of present your statistics next year that show how you're flaunting these rules. So I think we ought to come up with something fairly strict, because that's the way it's presented on the county side, is that these are very hard and strict rules, but then it seems like in application they're not. So I found this whole thing really problematic. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Lugo is going to comment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Trustee Knox, we are, as it states in our management response, legal office is working on an enforcement policy. You know, some of the constraints, it hasn't been on our, we haven't had a strict policy as it relates to enforcing some of the hours, and especially the limited duration. And as it relates to limited duration, we haven't even had a bright line as it relates to what that means. So to Trustee Moore's point, you know, what are counties, what are their benchmarks against the kind of a policy? So I think once we have an enforcement policy in place in collaboration with the Board of Retirement, as well as the county CEO's office, I think we'll see some better results. Also, one of our impediments is the data, being able to get the data from the county in terms of having those alert triggers for us to say, hey, you have an employee approaching 800 hours or 700 hours, or having some milestones set in place where we're able to proactively catch some of that compliance. But as we work through the enforcement policy, I think this is some of the things that we're going to be looking at to get a handle on it.
Thank you for that comment. Okay, Mr. Knox, does that answer your question? Great. Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. This is an interesting and excellent report. I am not sure that audit has an authority beyond uncovering this and reporting it, which I'm glad we're exercising. Certainly, LACERA has to follow the law in terms of what we pay in terms of benefits. I've been struggling with how to craft a motion. This certainly should go to the BOR. There's no question that the BOR would be interested. I suspect the BOI would be interested. I'm curious, Richard, is there an equivalent organization on the county side in addition to the executive office that might be interested in seeing this information?
The Department of Human Resources, I think, is also a party to the process. Yes.
Okay. Then, I would also say this. I note that staff, in what I presume is courtesy, proposed a recommendation is accept and file. We can always accept and file reports, but audit already is an autonomous committee with an independent budget. I think it's a bad precedent for us to do research and not share it with our colleagues on the boards. So I would ask that we consider not presenting as a default recommendation, accept and file for these kind of reports. I think it's important that we share the information that we uncover with our colleagues who aren't on the audit committee. So I will move that we pass this information along to both boards, to the executive office of the county, and to the human resources group that Richard just indicated.
So
I'll
are
second.
you accepting the recommendation and instructing that they pass this as an FYI item to the board?
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. That is my motion. I think there is a second.
I heard a second.
Yeah, I seconded it, but I want to clarify that when we forward this to the board, we want the boards to take some kind of action to initiate some process to get this whole problem under control. I think Mr. Bendall said there were some recommendations that they could make in collecting information, providing notifications. That might be some issues with the county, because I thought I also read where the county doesn't have the capability to do some of the data collection, but that's what's required. So if we refer this to the board, it's not a FYI, it's for the boards to take some action on solving this problem.
Mr. Bernstein, are you okay with that?
So I'm not clear that LACERA is the problem here. It doesn't, and Richard, if I'm misunderstanding, please correct me. It doesn't seem that we're paying our benefits incorrectly. It seems the problem is that the county is being lax in their enforcement of these policies. As a side note, the real story here is that this is a hell of a news story. And at some point, somebody's going to pick it up and they're going to be forced to deal with it, I imagine, beyond what they're dealing with it now. But I think our job really is to report it and bring it to their attention. I'm not sure that we're in a position to instruct them. So I would not, I would certainly pass it along for their review and consideration, but I'm not, and with an advice that they correct defaults that they find, but I'm not comfortable telling them what actions to take. I think that's their job to determine.
For clarification, Mr. Moore, I think you were discussing just within our purview to our board so that we ensure that we have the proper internally at LACERA. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not talking about the county. If
Mr. Moore, I
misunderstood
misunderstood you. Go on.
Yeah, okay.
Go on.
We necessarily have to work with the county, but what I'm saying is that we have to be proactive, because we can't just continue, providing benefits to people who really shouldn't be accruing them because no one's watching the farm. So if we've identified no one's watching, then let's take some proactive stance and work with the county to see if we can get this thing under control.
If I may paraphrase, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if we're going to report this to the county, then we should also take our own internal steps. Is that?
Yes, that's a
Mr.
good
Murr,
way
if I
to put
could
it.
just add though that the recommendations in the report clearly articulate the actions that we've recommended that
Right.
and management has accepted taking. So I think the actions initially for management to get from the county the data that allows them to monitor this on a real-time basis. Internal audit is able to get this data, but we're getting it after the fact, after the year's completed. We get summary data, but to get the actual hours and to get the data on the real time, that's all articulated in the report. So I'm not sure what else the board, except to support the executive team in their, I don't know what else there would be that would actually be an action at the board meeting besides just bringing it to their attention and ensuring that they're supporting management in getting this more defined data and taking these actions, defining clear lines around. So.
Okay. So then the motion would be to accept and instruct staff to forward the report to the board or committee, and then leave it to the committee to either support or not support, or as an FYI item. I'm confused.
I understood it, Chair Sanchez. We're going to pass this on to both boards, to the executive office of the county, to the human, to the organization that I can't remember the name that Richard mentioned is sort of similar, with a recommendation that they read the report and consider implementing the recommended actions.
Okay,
Right,
that is the motion. Wayne, are you still a second on that?
yes.
Excellent. Okay, Mr. Santos.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the report and the concern raised. The county does have the ability to collect information. Each department, speaking for my department, in order for a department to implement the 120 program, it has to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. Number one. And number two, I know at least with my department, they're really strict in enforcing the hours. So they do have that information available. I mean, on behalf of the department, so at least my department is due to the pandemic and the fact that the courthouses were shut down, we are dealing with a huge amount of cases that have to be processed right now, and we don't have the staff. A lot of people have left, and we're having a difficult time hiring, and typically it takes several years for somebody in my office to be trained. So the departments are really up against, at least my department is up against the wall. We operate under the Constitution that we are required to provide competent legal representation to the public. So I'm not excusing the department of the county, but I think it's something that we need to keep in mind. But that doesn't mean that the rules or the law be violated, but it can be done. So I'm in support of the motion and supporting the management and communicating with the county to provide better report and enforce the limit amount of hours that under the law people, retirees are allowed to work.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Knox?
Yeah, quickly, Mr. Santos said some of exactly what I was going to say. He's spot on. It's like overtime. There's no central county system that tracks overtime for everybody and sends up, alerts the minute, public defender or TTC goes over. It's up to those departments to be accountable for staying within their overtime limits. And it's the same thing with this. It's the central county not holding departments accountable for living within the means that they agreed to live when it comes to these rehired retirees. So I'll stop with that, and I'm supportive of the motion as well.
Thank you. I see no further questions. So we have a motion and a second. So if we could take the roll call.
Mr. Bernstein,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
yes,
Chair Sanchez.
Yes. Thank you. We'll move on to item D, a recommendation as submitted by George Lund, Senior Internal Auditor, that the Audit Committee review and discuss the Board Vantage Secure Document Access Review and take the standard actions. Mr. Lund?
Good morning again, Chair Sanchez and the Audit Committee trustees. I'm here to present the Board Vantage Secure Document Access Review that we conducted during this year. Responsible division for Board Vantage was the Systems Division and the Executive Office. We gave this audit to review a opportunities for improvement rating. Bit of the background on the Board Advantage. NASDAQ Board Vantage application is a vendor cloud-based software application acquired by LACERA in 2011 to provide a secure means for the trustees and the authorized staff to view the board and committee documents. This review was included in our audit plan due to a concern raised by a prior audit committee chair. Upon returning as an elected retired member on the Board of Investments, he noted that he had access to restricted Board of Retirement materials not normally provided to a Board of Investment trustees. The objectives we set for the review of the Board Vantage was to evaluate the controls around the process of adding, deleting, and assigning access. The second objective we had was to understand more about the two back office applications, the board packages and the board notes that support the Board Vantage application, and the controls that are protecting the unauthorized access or these applications. Scope and engagement was from January 1st of this year into the current period. So trustees, you're aware that the one meeting application is currently being implemented and will replace Board Vantage. As such, management has committed to resolving on the three issues that we identified with the implementation of the one meeting application. Our first finding, we noted that an expected BV application, BV also known as Board Vantage, application access control restriction was not in place. Additionally, document access audit trails were not turned on. We gave this a high rating because the audit trails or event transaction logs should be turned on. They're a critical part of any application that is dealing with sensitive material. Management has agreed that one meeting will be implemented with comprehensive access controls and audit trails. Our issue number two, we noted that supporting applications, board packages, and board notes, access was not restricted and audit trails were not fully functional on them either. Again, we gave this a high rating because the applications and transaction logs are critical to anything that is any application is dealing with sensitive material. Management has agreed that the one meeting will be implemented with comprehensive access controls and audit trail reports will be sent to the executive staff for review. The third issue that we noted, that policy documents personnel authorized to access the 7 levels of document security was not current. Management again has agreed that with the implementation of one meeting, the new process will have developed and documented to ensure access listings are kept current. With that, that's my summary of the report.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr.
Chair.
Lund. It's fairly straightforward. Do we have any questions? Do we have a motion?
I will move staff recommendation.
To accept and file?
Correct.
Do I have a second?
Second,
Thank you. Take roll.
Mr. Bernstein,
aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Yes.
Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, moving on to section 6, item A. I will take it over to Mr. Amick, Senior Internal Auditor, who will present our audited financial statements.
Yes. Hello and good morning, Chair Sanchez and trustees. In your package, you have the results and the related reports for LACERA's fiscal year ended 2022 financial statement audits. I'm happy to report LACERA did receive an unqualified audit opinion or a clean audit opinion. Notwithstanding, Plan Morad did identify a material weakness. Now, excuse me, just in case you didn't get a chance to read the 250 pages, I know it was enthralling, but
Titillating. It was
yes.
titillating.
We do have Plant Moran with us today, and they have prepared a short presentation going over the process and the results, and will be available for any questions you may have. Regarding the material weakness issue, investments management has drafted a written response, and that can be found immediately following this cover memo. With that being said, I'd like to introduce partner Jean Young and senior manager Amanda Kronk from Plant Moran. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Either one?
No, you got it.
Okay, so technology is not my strong point.
I think you want to turn that one on. There we go.
Got it.
You're in.
Sorry. Good morning, everyone. So thank you for having us. Again, as we're going to go through the slides very quickly, again, Michelle Waterworth is also a technical colleague that we have. She is the leader of our public sector technical standards and has involvement with national boards. So she is a resource that's also available to the audit team as needed. So the next slide for the agenda, really, we just want to highlight a high level overview of the audit, kind of the process that we go through. And as Nate highlighted, just go through any issues or concerns that we had for our required communication. Slide 4 is really talking about the audit timeline. So again, this really hasn't been any different than it has been in the past. The procedures were performed remotely. Again, we were able to get access to everything that we needed to. We had weekly meetings that were able to update critical dates list that we go through with management and the members of the finance and other areas. We were able to perform those procedures, and we did issue our report on October 14th, which would be when all the audit procedures were completed. As Nathan said, there is the audited financials that are included, the required communication, and then we also do the GASB 68 and GASB 75, which is used by the various employers for their recording of the allocation of the pension and the OPEB. With that, Amanda's going to walk us through kind of the areas of focus of the audit. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Good morning. So as Jean mentioned, we're going to focus on what the audit areas of focus were. This by no means is an all-encompassing list, but our audit and the goal of the audit is to express that opinion on your financial statements. And in order to do so, we are constantly assessing risk and what are the highest risk areas related to LACERA's financial statements. And here's, again, a high level overview of some of the riskier areas. And again, we're focusing on investment valuation, primarily the harder to value investments, not necessarily the ones that you can go out and price in an open market, but the ones that require estimation. Census data detail testing and demographic testing, particularly at the county level. So that data is very vital to LACERA's actuarial valuation. So again, we're performing numerous tests on that data, coupled with testing the assumptions used in that valuation. So again, numerous assumptions are used to end up at that liability, that pension liability. and various calculations. So again, those are vital assumptions. Certainly the accuracy of the benefit payments to both retirees and disability payments. So again, selecting samples, making sure that those calculations are valid and in accordance with regulations. And then last, but certainly not least, financial reporting. So ensuring that those financial statements are free from material misstatement. So we focus our testing on a number of different areas, from analytics to control testing to substantive testing. As mentioned on the next slide, the goal of the audit is an audit opinion. And we're happy to report that we have issued what's called an unmodified opinion on LACERA's financial statements. So what that means to this group is that those financial statements are free from material misstatement. And that unmodified opinion is the highest level of assurance that you can obtain on a set of financial statements. We saved you here from looking at all three or four pages of that opinion letter. But one thing I did want to point out, in that opinion letter, you will see what's called an emphasis of matter paragraph. This is not new to LACERA. And that really is, it's not bad by any, it's just a standard approach when you have significant harder to value investments that do require estimation. So this is just solely alerting the reader that LACERA does have alternative investments and harder to value that do require management's estimation. On the next slide, the next two slides, actually, we're going to get into some of our required audit communications that the auditing standards do require us to communicate. So this first slide here is focused on a follow-up and just some general items regarding the results of our audit. And you may recall during the planning phase of our audit, we communicate how we think our audit is going to go. And this letter is really the bookend to that and sharing with you how our audit went in accordance with that plan. Again, just a few summarization items here of that 4-page letter. Again, the financial statements issued do include estimates, the largest of which are, again, those harder to value investment valuations and actuarial assumptions, primarily the investment rate of return and discount rate and mortality assumptions used. So again, you've engaged an actuary to assist you with those assumptions and ensuring they're reasonable. And again, our audit procedures on both of these areas focus on the reasonableness of the selected assumptions and estimates. We're happy to report back that we had no difficulties or disagreements with management during the course of our audit, and we had no need to propose any audit adjustments or any uncorrected misstatements. So again, both good items to report back. The next item, and as a follow-up to what Nathan already laid the groundwork for, is our audit did uncover an item particularly related to investment valuation of one particular investment, and it did rise to the level of a material weakness. And is included in our internal control report over financial reporting. I do want to give the group some background and maybe a little bit of definition, not necessarily an audit class, but I want to start at the bottom of this slide and really give you a little bit of background on the types of deficiencies so you can see how we did get to the conclusion of a material weakness on this particular item. So a control deficiency is really the lowest level of deficiency, if you will, and that is really a deficient control that could not be material, could not rise to the level of material to the financial statements, and certainly isn't material. Oftentimes there's other controls in place at the organization that would alleviate that risk, if you will. So moving up to significant deficiency, again, we're not in a material misstatement to the financial statement position, but still significant enough to warrant attention of those charged with governance. So perhaps there's not strong surrounding controls, et cetera. Material weakness really arrives at either A, it is a material issue or could have had a material impact on the financial statements, or there are no other surrounding controls that would have reduced that material risk to your financial statements. So the item that was identified through our audit is related to investment valuation of one particular investment. And what our audit uncovered is that an audited financial statement was not available for one of the investments we picked in our substantive testing. And that testing really is derived from a judgmental process of analytics and different things that our team does to identify and select our population. We did, like I mentioned, we did identify this during our substantive testing. We, again, judgmentally selected it. And at the time our testing was performed, LACERA did not have the audited financial statements and had not reviewed them as part of their internal control process. The investment manager, upon our digging and upon our requests, did allow us, Plant Moran, to see that audited financial statement. So we could validate that investment was materially correct in LACERA's financial statements. But again, as a point of control and controls that management has in place, that financial statement nor other validation procedures had not been performed at the time of our audit. And thus the deficient internal control did exist at the time our testing was performed. So I know that was a lot of information about the audit process, certainly by no means all of the audit process, but certainly highlights nonetheless. So Madam Chair, we'd be happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Great. And I will also add to that there was a process of assurance. It just wasn't meeting the requirements that you were looking for. So I want to make sure that we don't ignore that. So any other questions? Okay.
Just a quick comment, Madam Chair.
Mr. Santos.
With regards to the deficiency finding, my understanding, and I'd be interested to hear from high-level management, either the CEO or Mr. Lugo, that subsequent to this finding, was the matter corrected? Was the contract amended? What was the outcome at the end of the day after this finding?
Mr. Grable has charged to the fore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Santos, the matter is resolved. We've amended the contract and we've received back audits.
And I have also, Mr. Santos, I have also interacted with this issue, and I am very satisfied with a very, very strong and quick response.
Great, thank you. I thought it was important to mention that.
Great, thank you. All right, any other questions or comments? Super, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item B, which is management's response.
This is one of those non-material to the financial statement control deficiencies that Plant Moran reports to the CEO, not required to be brought to the audit committee, but which Mr. Fryman has elected to make sure he brings to your attention. There was just one matter this year. It's an ongoing issue related to the county's ability to collect retroactive contributions on certain payments. Some progress has been made in this area, but it's still an ongoing issue, and Mr. Lugo is here to address management's response to it.
Thank you for that background, Mr. Bendel.
Madam Chair, committee members, as Mr. Bendel outlined, the memo dated November 1st pretty much outlines the issue as it relates to member contributions, specifically related to retroactive payments. Our member operations group is working collaboratively with our auditor controller's office or the auditor controller's office in the county to try to reconcile some of the member contributions that are coming forth. There's an issue with the contribution rates. So we have some underpayments and member accounts that need to be reconciled. They have made progress. Our approach right now is to try to rectify the retroactive payments that are over 60 months. So if there's any detailed questions, we do have Mr. Popovich here to provide further details in terms of the engagement with the auditor controller's office.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions or comments? Thank you. Hearing none. Thank you for that comment. So we'll move on to item C, audit plan status report. Mr. Emick.
Yes, thank you. Hello again, Chair Sanchez and trustees. This next item is a status report on internal audits fiscal year end 2023 audit plan. Next slide, please. All right. At your last meeting, we presented to you the following projects to be initiated in the first quarter of this fiscal year. There was one project that is not on this list that we did add, and it was the RFP for the financial auditor. Next slide, please. Now, taking into consideration our staffing restraints with both Richard and Leisha being out for considerable amounts of time, I'm actually pleased to say that we've progressed quite nicely. So of the 18 projects that were on that list, 7 projects have been completed. 2 projects are perpetual and they'll be ongoing throughout the year. Next slide, please. Now we have 5 projects that are in progress, 3 which are to be finished by the end of November, and 2 larger projects that have been scheduled to be completed in January and February of 2023. And lastly, we have 4 remaining projects that haven't been started, and they're pending or they've been rescheduled to quarter 4. Right. Next slide, please. So this slide here is a graphical representation of our current status. The 2 graphics to the left, they really just mirror the statistics I just provided with regards to in progress, pending, et cetera, as well as the scheduled completion dates for those in progress items. Now, the graphic in your top right corner there, you could see they definitely don't compare on a one-to-one. So the column on the left is the fiscal year September 2022 audit plan status versus the current audit plan status on the right of that area. Now, currently, we've completed more projects at this time than we did at this time last year. However, we had a significant amount of pending rollover and in progress projects at this time last year. And that's because we had a significant amount of rollover projects from the previous fiscal year. Fortunately, at the end of fiscal year 2022, we did a much better job at putting a hard stop to our projects and completing a lot of those. So at this time, you can see that we have a much smaller graphic to the right, and that's only with regards to the items that we've started being those 18 current projects.
If I could just ask a question right here, that September 22, I'm assuming that part of that was affected by COVID.
I think part of that was, I think by that time in 2022, we were really up and running technically. We were able to interact, but I just think we had bitten off a lot, and we had a lot of administrative and large administrative projects that ate up a lot of our time at the real front end of the year. And it didn't allow us to really progress as planned at the beginning of that fiscal year to whittle down those projects.
Got it. So you bit off a smaller chunk and you managed to accomplish more projects, which is the blue section.
Yeah, so when we brought to your committee, we wanted to let you guys know that for this fiscal year, we really wanted to narrow our focus quarterly and stay focused with each auditor having no more than 3 projects, so they could really focus and complete them in a really expeditious manner. And again, taking into consideration some of the shortages we've had with leave, we've done quite well. We had 18 projects. That's almost half of our audit plan, including the perpetual ones. That's 9. That's 25% of our audit plan.
Got it.
Just to clarify on this chart, that's the fiscal year ended 2022. So that's actually September of 21. And this is September of 23 is actually September of 22 for the fiscal year ended 2023.
So confusing, but thank you.
There's one remaining graphic that's in the bottom right. This graphic represents the percentage of our time that we've allocated to the various operational sectors throughout the organization.
Right.
Next slide, please. This slide shows our progress, or honestly lack thereof, regarding the implementation of our IIA quality service recommendations. Again, due to our staffing constraints, we haven't had the ability to progress since our last meeting. Now, however, we recently performed a risk reward exercise to prioritize those open recommendations, and we've started a plan to address those, taking the most relevant ones to be put in place first.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So addition to our audit projects, we also have administrative responsibilities. These projects vary and can run the gambit from implementing new audit technology to supporting your committee to training. The ones listed here are the most prevalent tasks that we've undertaken in this quarter. Next slide, please. So in addition to our projects and at our admin responsibilities, we also provide advisory services throughout the organization. This often takes place when we participate in cross-functional teams. This list here identifies the three projects, the three advisory projects that we're currently working on. Next slide. So this slide here, and I apologize for how small everything is, but it's kind of hard to squeeze this large calendar all on one page. But this is your audit committee calendar, and it highlights all the items of discussion and documents that we're required to bring to you at your audit committee. So if you look towards the right-hand side of the graphic, you'll see the blue cells with the X's. That identifies the items that we have already brought to your committee. And then the blue cells without the X's on the right, those are the items that we'll be bringing to your committee in the winter and spring meetings. Next slide, please. And then this last slide here are the projects that we have commenced or we will be commencing for our Q2 engagements. And we're hoping that by the end of Q2, we get everybody back and we're able to charge ahead and really make a good dent in the audit plan. So, and I'm available for any questions.
Super, thank you. I just want to compliment that this presentation was incredibly clear. And, you know, I think that it also reflects the focus that the department has had on sort of being successful in the plan. And so I applaud that effort, and it is very apparent.
Yeah. Personally speaking, from my perspective, working with the management team and having a real focus on my projects it's really allowed me to execute at a higher level than in the past when you're juggling like five projects. So I appreciate it, and I think it makes us more successful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Do we have any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Moving on. Thank you, Mr. Amick. Moving on to the review of the privacy audit recommendations from fiscal year 2022, an update by Christina Sun, Senior Internal Auditor. Ms. Sun.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Audit Committee trustees. This memo is Internal Audit's report on our in-depth review of audit recommendations issued by Austin Bird as part of their 2016 audit of LACERA. The purpose of the original audit was to perform a comprehensive study of LACERA's business operations related to compliance with laws and regulations, privacy and data security management, and adequacy of privacy policies and procedures. Since 2016, LACERA management has made substantial progress in addressing these privacy recommendations. However, there are still a handful of recommendations that remain outstanding due to resource constraints and other organizational priorities. For the purpose of Internal Audit's follow-up review of the privacy audit recommendations, our objective was to inquire with management on the status of the outstanding recommendations and to verify the continued effectiveness of previously implemented recommendations. We also used this opportunity to conduct a privacy risk assessment of LACERA. So out of the 59 recommendations that management agreed to implement, a total of 43 recommendations have been fully implemented and verified by Internal Audit as of September 30th, 2022. This includes 10 recommendations that were implemented during the last 2 fiscal years in the pandemic, which address privacy concerns related to data security and IT risks. For the 16 outstanding privacy recommendations, management is still in the process of working through them. Internal Audit will follow up on these remaining ones through planned engagements. And finally, please remember that due to the privileged nature of the 2016 audit report, the specific recommendations cannot be discussed in the open session meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments on this? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the recommendation follow-up for sensitive information technology areas with Gabriel Tafoya, Senior Internal Auditor.
The RECO follow-up is next.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was charging ahead. Item E, the recommendation follow-up report also by Ms. Sun, Senior Internal Auditor. Sorry about that.
Okay, good morning again. So this is a different type of reco follow-up. This is our regular quarterly follow-up of recommendations that are outstanding for the fiscal year 2023. For the first quarter, it covers the period from July to September 2022. So in the last couple months, internal audit has issued both assurance and consulting engagements, which resulted in recommendations that are both operational and strategic in nature. For example, as you recall, during the last audit committee meeting, we represented the organizational governance review and issued 9 strategic recommendations related to governance maturity. At the time, the committee instructed internal audit to track the progress of these recommendations as part of our regular RECO follow-up. Due to these recent changes, this is the first time that we're separating the recommendations into operational and strategic recommendation for reporting purpose. So off the bat, I'm happy to report that there are no open recommendations from prior to 2021.
My work here is done.
Yes, and there's only, everything is actually from this current year, except for one, because it has a longer implementation date due to the nature of the recommendation. So yeah, we've done a really great job. There's no more aging report because they're all current. So yes. And we're still currently actively working with management to monitor the progress of the recommendations. So there were 11 open recommendations at the start of the year for operational ones. 5 new ones were issued during the quarter, and 1 were implemented and verified by internal audit. And that gave us 15 open recommendations for operationals. And similarly, there were 6 strategic recommendations at the beginning of the quarter, and 13 more were added during the quarter. Because of these natures, recommendations covered the broader operating risks and control gaps. The executive office is evaluating them during the current strategic planning efforts. I've included the detailed reports in appendixes for these open recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to hear that news. And with regard to the strategic recommendations, those are recommendations that will require a broader and longer planning and response as a part of the strategic planning process. Is that correct? Yep. Okay.
That is correct. Yes.
So any other comments or questions? Super. Thank you, Ms. Sun.
Yeah.
Okay, now moving on to item F, the recommendation follow-up for sensitive information technology areas. Gabriel Tafoya, Senior Internal Auditor.
I am actually going to take this one.
Gabriel, you've changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
So internal audit reports recommendations which relate to our sensitive information technology engagement separate from our regular RECO follow-up that Tina was just presenting in order to be able to provide a high level summary of the recommendations while keeping some of that information, protecting some of that sensitive information. For the quarter ended September 30th, 2022, we have recommendations that are coming from 7 different IT engagements. During that time, systems closed out 3 recommendations which related to the Clear Skies penetration engagement, and they were able to do that after they completed updates to LACERA.com. And the Information Security Office closed out 2 Moss Adams engagement recommendations after they enhanced their reporting related to their phishing campaigns. That leaves us with currently 30 outstanding IT sensitive recommendations. Systems Information Security Office, the Admin Services Division, they're working together to address these 2 high risk Moss Adams recommendations, and these relate to strengthening LACERA's physical security controls and ensuring that we provide security awareness training to all staff, which we already did provide it. We did provide security awareness training, but when Moss Adams came in, we hadn't provided it in that time period. So management believes that these will be addressed by early 2023.
Great, thank you. Well, on that note, I know that IT is taking this very seriously because I can rarely get into my own email, which I actually have access to. So there you go. But thank you for that. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Item G, the status of other external audits not conducted at the discretion of audit, everything else. Thank
All
you,
the other
Mr.
ones.
Bendel.
This time there's actually three. I was made aware of a HR recruiting review that's being done by Liebert Cassidy and Whitmore in the human resources area. Siegel is performing their annual claims audits within their retiree healthcare division. And the InfoSec group performed a penetration test. Now that's something that we've done on a regular basis within internal audit independently, but this is a test that was done by our information security group that was completed recently. That's all I have for that.
Okay, great. Any questions on this? Okay, moving on. Item H, the internal audit staffing activity report. Mr. Bendel?
Well, as far as staffing goes, Nate alluded to the fact that we've had some challenges within our management and myself out with the health matter earlier this year. Glad to be back. And Alicia Collins is currently out. We're hoping to have her back by the early new calendar year. We did also welcome, I'd like to welcome Kimberly Hines to the internal audit team who joined us within the last month. So that's all I have for staffing.
Okay, great. I saw a thumbs up from Mr. Knox. I thought that was a hand. Okay, so any other comments on that? So just a question for me, Mr. Bendel. So what are your staffing plans for next year?
Well,
sorry, didn't mean to catch you off guard.
No. I believe we do have one vacant item, but it is on the prioritization list with human resources. It's to be determined. We'd like to recruit that position if we can within the next year or the next fiscal year, if possible.
Good to know. All right, thank you. So the next two items are for information only: the continuous audit program and the ethics hotline status report, which the materials were provided in your book. Are there any questions on that? Hearing none, we'll move on to section 7, consultant comments. Mr. Griffin, the floor is yours.
Good morning. And I guess the best news is I have no comments, and I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Oh, one comment. I am considering on the logistics of, I would love to be at the meeting in person. And I'm looking forward to that for the next meeting.
Well, we are looking forward to having you, Mr. Griffin. So I'm sure we can get that arranged. You're one of the few folks that I want to be there. I'm the only trustee sitting on the dais right now. So we are looking forward to seeing you in person. Thank you for that. Do we have any items for staff review?
Sorry, I had my mic off. Trustee Santos requested that the RFP analysis and due diligence such as tide fulfillment be provided in materials moving forward. And the trustee Knox requested that an update to be provided regarding the engagement between LACERA and the county on the rehired enforcement policy and process.
Thank you for that. Any items for future agendas?
Not at this moment.
Super. Good of the order.
Mr. Bernstein? Okay. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, wonderful meeting. Chairman Sanchez, thanks so much to the staff. Everyone, please enjoy a wonderful holiday, safe and wonderful holiday season. Hopefully none of your family members will contribute to the overall flu epidemic. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Knox?
Super meeting, Chair Sanchez, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Appreciate all the work that went into all the reports and the audit work. Very good.
Mr. Moore?
Happy Thanksgiving for everyone. I'm actually in Washington, D.C. now because I'm going to have Thanksgiving with all of my family here on the East Coast this year. And I hope you all have a similar great time on Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
Yes, thank you. Excellent meeting. As always, the staff does a tremendous job in the materials and the information provided, as well as our partners, the outside Plan Moran and others that do the work for us. Really appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving. And Mr. Jones, unfortunately, and ahead of you in terms of the flu season, but surviving. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Mr. Kehoe? Okay. Chair Sanchez?
Thank
Before
you.
Chair Sanchez goes, I was away. I just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and let her have the final word.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. On that note, Thanksgiving is a time where we express our gratitude. And I just, I feel like it's only fitting that the last time I was the sole trustee on the dais, we had items in our RECO follow-up that were 8 years old. And so I feel like we've gone full circle, and here I am, the only person on the dais today, but we have made so much progress. And I want to express my gratitude to staff and to management and to all of our partners who help us in these efforts. I really believe that you know, we have and continue to become just an effective, incredible organization. And as a result of that, the organization at LACERA is stronger because of it. I've always believed, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on the audit committee, but I've always believed that a strong internal audit department leads to an efficient organization. And I do stand by that. And so I just want to thank everyone for the seriousness with which you approach the work that you do and the partnership that you have with the organization and the receptiveness that the organization has to what always feels like an uncomfortable situation, but in the end, it makes us stronger. So I will take that mini victory lap and just remind us that, you know, we still have more to do, and I'm just thrilled with the direction we're going. So I'm just expressing my gratitude. Thank you so much. Thank you. So with that, I believe we will adjourn to an executive session.